Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight we'll take a slow and gentle journey through the history and evolution of pandas. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the soothing story of these remarkable creatures guide you toward rest and relaxation. The panda story isn't one of roaring battles or sudden revolutions. It's a story of silence. Over millions of years, this bear reshaped itself without ever drawing attention. Its great transformation was so gradual, most of the world never noticed. Tonight you will. We're uncovering the long, almost invisible process that turned a carnivorous ancestor into the slow-moving, bamboo-dependent giant we know today. If you've ever wondered how survival can be quiet and still remarkable, this is your night. Imagine a creature you wouldn't recognize as a panda at all. No black and white markings, no big round head, no comical waddle. Instead, picture a shaggy bear-shaped animal with a longer muzzle, a leaner build, and teeth that tell a very different story. This was Ailur Arctos, moving through the forests of what is now China and parts of the eastern Himalayas about 8 million years ago. It looked more like a generic bear than a bamboo specialist. If you saw one, you wouldn't think gentle bamboo eater. You'd think bear that might follow you if you smell like food. The ground it walked on wasn't the dense, high-altitude bamboo forest we associate with today's panda. Back then, much of the region was warmer, greener in a mixed way, thick patches of broadleaf forest in some places, open woodland in others. Rivers carved through valleys, and in the foothills where forest met grassland, small herds of ancient ungulates grazed. Ailur Arctos fit right into that world, a generalist carnivore-omnivore in a land full of variety. Fossils from sites in Yunnan province and the foothills of the Tibetan plateau give us pieces of this picture. Jawbones, teeth, and parts of the skull that speak more than the entire skeleton would. Those teeth were sharp enough to shear meat, but broad enough to crush fibrous plant matter. That's the hallmark of a diet that's flexible. There's no evidence it relied on bamboo the way modern pandas do. Bamboo was there, but it was just one plant among many. Ailur Arctos likely ate shoots and leaves when convenient, but it wouldn't have ignored a small mammal, a bird egg, or fallen fruit. Its jaw muscles, reconstructed from attachment points on fossil skulls, show strength for biting, but also range for chewing meat. If it hunted, it probably took small prey. If it scavenged, it cracked bones for marrow. It was an opportunist, and in ecosystems rich with different foods, that's a good way to survive. The big question is how such an adaptable animal became the specialist we see today. The shift didn't start with a dramatic environmental disaster. It was slower, more like a steady nudge. Around the late Miocene, climate patterns across Asia began changing. Seasonal variations became more pronounced. Summers could be warm and wet, winters cooler and drier. Forest composition changed too. Bamboo began to gain a more stable presence in the understory of certain habitats. Not in massive monocultures yet, but enough to be a predictable food source during parts of the year. If you're a bear in that setting, you follow the food that's easiest to find. Other foods, especially meat, might require traveling farther, competing with other predators, or risking injury. Bamboo doesn't run away. It's in roughly the same place year after year. It's there when fruiting trees are bare and when animal prey is tougher to track. Even if it isn't the highest energy option, its reliability might pull your menu gradually in that direction. If seasons keep favoring this dependable plant, your descendants might find themselves leaning on it more and more. Fossils of Ailur Arctos from different locations help to trace this path. In the lowlands of what is now Sichuan, pollen samples from ancient soils suggest denser growth of grasses, including bamboo relatives, starting to cover large patches of the forest floor. Toothwear patterns in some Ileoroctos specimens from these regions show more grinding surfaces than their cousins from higher Himalayan valleys, hinting at more plant matter in their diet. Lower altitude populations may have started the trend toward plant dependence earlier, while their upland relatives stuck with a more mixed diet a bit longer. Over generations, the physical signs of this dietary leaning started to appear. Canine teeth still present became slightly less suited to ripping flesh and more in balance with molars fit for crushing and grinding. Jawbones thickened. The ridges where chewing muscles attached grew more pronounced, giving extra power to repetitive side-to-side grinding. No single animal in the lineage suddenly became a bamboo specialist, but inch by inch, bite by bite, the anatomy shifted. You can think of it like a family recipe changing over centuries. First, you swap one spice, a few decades later, another ingredient. By the end, the dish barely resembles the original, but no one generation noticed the change as it happened. Each descendant was just a bear using the tools it had to make the best of the food it could get. This was also a time when Asia's animal communities were reshaping in slow motion. Larger predators roamed the same territories, saber-toothed cats, hyenas, and ancestors of tigers. If a mid-sized bear wanted to avoid direct competition, using a food source other carnivores ignored was an easy way to carve out a niche. That's one of the advantages of bamboo. Almost no one else in that environment was built to use it as a primary food. All Ileoroctos needed were the beginnings of the right jaw and teeth, and it had a banquet that didn't attract much company. The Himalayan fossil sites offer another clue to the slow refinement. In these steeper, cooler environments, forests had bursts of seasonal bamboo growth. Up here, the bears probably switched diets more with the seasons, eating more meat or berries when they were available and turning to bamboo in leaner times. This seasonal switching might have given them a survival edge during shifts in vegetation patterns, but also kept the anatomical pressure toward plant eating applied over the long term. Even populations that weren't eating bamboo year-round were still chewing it often enough for the trait to stick. By the time the Pliocene was underway, those small differences had added up. The descendants of Ileoroctos showed clearer signs of plant dominance in their diets. Fossilized teeth began to match more closely with the wear patterns seen in modern pandas, even though the animals were still more omnivorous in reality. The gradual thickening of molars and shortening of the muzzle suggested generations of adaptation to tougher, more fibrous meals. They still had the skeleton of a carnivore, but the mouth and jaw of a committed chewer. This early phase of transformation didn't make Ileoroctos or its immediate descendants look like the panda you're picturing. They still lacked the iconic fur pattern, the round face, and the stocky proportions. They were probably more agile on varied terrain and may have ranged more widely in search of food. But in the quiet grind of their daily eating, they were setting the stage for the future. Once a lineage begins to reshape its teeth and jaws for one primary type of food, reversal becomes less likely. If environment and diet work together to reward that shift, the process continues. In that respect, the changes in Ileoroctos's teeth are like the first stones in a wall, not the tallest or most noticeable part, but the part everything else will be built on. Without those stronger, flatter molars and thicker jaw muscles, the later panda's complete commitment to bamboo wouldn't have been possible, and that commitment would go far beyond teeth. Other parts of the body would eventually change to match the demands of this stubborn plant. For now, in this stage of the story, what you'd see is just a bear adapting quietly to what was available. No roaring conquest, no dramatic leap into a brand new shape, just small adjustments repeated over hundreds of thousands of years. A preference forming so slowly it would be invisible if you only looked at one lifetime. Invisible, but irreversible. And yet those changes only addressed the first challenge, getting the bamboo into their mouths and chewing it. The next challenge was holding it steady while stripping leaves or peeling shoots. Nature gave them plenty of jaw power, but the tool that made them true bamboo specialists didn't sit in the mouth at all. It sat lower, in a place you wouldn't expect, hidden inside the wrist. Pandas don't have thumbs, but if you handed one a stalk of bamboo, it could hold it with more precision than most animals you've ever seen. They can strip leaves, rotate the stem, and work their way down the stalk with a sort of methodical efficiency. At first glance, you might think you're watching them use a thumb the way we do. But what's actually happening is a little stranger. Their thumb isn't a real thumb at all. It's a bone from the wrist that's been pushed and reshaped by evolution into something that acts like a thumb without actually being one. That bone is the radial sesamoid. In most mammals, it's a small, almost inoffensive bit of anatomy. Something you wouldn't notice unless you were looking at the skeleton under bright lab lights. It sits near the junction of the wrist and paw, doing standard support work in the hand structure, helping with tendon movement and muscle anchoring, but in pandas, the radial sesamoid has grown unusually large and elongated. It sticks out sideways from the actual paw bones, creating an extra digit-like projection. Under fur and skin, it looks like part of the hand. In motion, it's positioned across from the real 5 digits, which lets it pinch objects against the paw. That's the magic, not growing a 6th finger, but repurposing an existing part no one else thought to use. So why bother changing this tiny wrist bone into a gripping tool when most bears get by just fine without one? The answer is the kind of long-term ecological pressure that takes millions of years to sculpt anything noticeable. Once pandas, or rather their direct ancestors, started depending more on bamboo, they were faced with a problem. Their jaws could crush the hard stalks, their teeth could grind plant fiber, but their paws weren't great at holding narrow, slippery stems in place while eating. Without claws adapted for fine gripping, the next best option was to manipulate the hand structure itself. And instead of waiting for an entirely new digit to evolve, which is extremely rare in mammals, slightly changing the proportions of a wrist bone was a faster solution by evolutionary standards. Mechanically, here's how it works. The enlarged sesamoid connects to muscles in the forearm and paw, which let it swing inward and press bamboo against the pads of the real fingers. Think of it less like a thumb that moves independently and more like a movable shelf. The panda levers the bamboo into that shelf and traps it there, controlling it with tiny adjustments of the paw. The claws keep it from sliding, the pads stabilize it, and the false thumb gives it a pivot point. Watching it in action, you see the panda sit back, rotate the stalk to reach younger, more tender sections, and peel them with the precision you'd get from twisting something between your fingers. This sort of anatomical improvisation isn't unique to pandas, though their version is arguably one of the most refined. Other animals have reworked body parts into tools in unexpected ways. Moles, for example, have their own version of an enlarged sesamoid that acts like a 6th finger to help them shovel through soil. Giant red pandas, a completely different species from the giant panda but sharing bamboo in their diet, have a similar wrist adaptation, though not as exaggerated. Even elephants without anything resembling a human hand have modified the tip of their trunk into finger-like projections that can pinch and grasp, adapted for their environment and food needs. These examples remind you that evolution doesn't always invent something new from scratch. Often it takes a shortcut, reshaping what's already there. The panda's false thumb didn't appear overnight. Early versions in ancestors like Ilear arctos were smaller, less functional, and probably only helped a little with manipulating food. Over countless generations, each slight increase in size or change in joint shape provided a small benefit, maybe allowing the bear to eat bamboo a little faster, waste less of it, or manage thicker stalks without dropping them. Millimeter by millimeter, the bones stretched, muscles shifted, and the connection between diet and anatomy became locked in. Once a functional false thumb was in place, there was no going back without losing that bamboo advantage. That's how evolutionary traps can work. When a species becomes so well adapted to one food source or method of survival that reversing the change would mean losing the very thing keeping it alive. For pandas, the false thumb cemented their reliance on bamboo. Without it, they'd return to clumsier handling and slower eating, which in a larger-bodied animal with low-energy food could tip the balance towards starvation. You might be wondering why other bamboo-eating animals didn't develop exactly the same thing. Part of the answer is that most of them have different feeding strategies. Certain monkeys and lemurs use real thumbs because primates already had them. Some hoofed mammals strip bamboo leaves using mouths alone, bypassing the need for a manipulative grip. Pandas approached the bamboo problem as bears, which meant working within the limits of a bear's basic paw structure. The false thumb is bear-specific engineering. If you were to look at a panda skeleton in a museum display, that extra digit stands out sharply once you know it's there. It's a blunt projection from the wrist line, mirroring the arc of the real fingers. With the fur gone, you notice it's rougher, more solid, built for pressure rather than delicate twitching. It's exactly what you'd design if your goal was to break into a fibrous plant and keep doing it for 12 hours a day. From that point in their history, the false thumb made the pandas' bamboo lifestyle even more practical. They could grip shoots in one paw, bite through in sections, and hold them steady while stripping away outer layers. They could also handle more than one stalk at a time by tucking extras under the forearm, something you sometimes see in wild footage, essentially creating a little personal stockpile. This ability to process bamboo efficiently wasn't just convenient, it was necessary. Given their low digestion efficiency for the plant, anything that lets them eat more in less time directly translates into survival. It's worth noting that the false thumb comes with trade-offs. It isn't as nimble as a primate thumb, and it likely reduces some flexibility in the paw for other bear-like activities. But those drawbacks are outweighed by how perfectly it serves its single purpose. Evolution often works that way. You don't get an all-purpose upgrade, you get a highly specialized feature built around the most critical challenge your species faces. By the time the modern giant panda had fully developed its false thumb, its entire physical toolkit was synchronized for one way of life: teeth for pulverizing bamboo, jaws for constant grinding, a body built to conserve energy, and hands adapted for holding stalks upright in all positions. This package of traits locked pandas further into their ecological niche as near-exclusive bamboo feeders. The more they relied on that wrist bone for eating, the harder it became to imagine them switching back to a generalist diet. The story of the false thumb often gets oversimplified as a quirky fact, something to marvel at briefly before moving on. But in reality, it's one of the clearest examples of evolution repurposing an existing structure in a way that changes the course of an animal's history. Without it, pandas might still be bears dabbling in bamboo seasonally. With it, they became bamboo specialists for life. Holding bamboo, though, is only half the battle. What's inside those fibrous stalks isn't exactly a nutritional treasure trove for an animal designed, at least on paper, like a carnivore. They can grip it, they can strip it. The next question is, how do they manage to live almost entirely on something their gut was never originally built to process? Pandas eat bamboo for hours every single day, yet inside, they have the plumbing of a carnivore. Their intestines are short, their stomach fairly simple, and their body entirely lacking the fermentation chambers you'd find in a cow, a goat, or even a rabbit. The blueprint of their digestive system still says meat eater. There is no multi-chambered stomach breaking down tough cellulose, no long winding gut giving bacteria extra days to pull nutrients out of plants. Food passes through them fast, which is the opposite of ideal if that food is bamboo, a plant designed by nature to be hard to digest, tough to break, and low in calories. That creates a basic problem. A cow can take a mouthful of grass and get a decent return from it because its microbiome and multi-chambered stomach breaks cellulose into sugars and fatty acids efficiently. Pandas don't have that. They tear apart their food with teeth, crush it with powerful jaws, and then a lot of it just slides right through with more nutritional value still in it. If you think about it, that's almost absurd, spending all day on a single food source that your body isn't even well equipped to use. So, how do they survive? The short answer is quantity, sheer, relentless quantity. An adult panda will eat up to 30 or even 40 pounds of bamboo in a day. They strip leaves, crush stems, and chew until their jaws ache, all to make up for what they can't extract nutritionally from each bite. Instead of becoming better at pulling energy from bamboo, they've become experts at putting as much bamboo into their system as possible every day of their lives. Inside their gut, though, there is one significant adaptation. While the digestive tract itself stayed carnivore-like, their gut microbiota, the community of bacteria living in their intestines, has shifted over evolutionary time to help out. These bacterial species are more common in herbivores than in carnivores, and some have the enzymes needed to break down cellulose. Microbiome studies on wild and captive pandas show the presence of certain Clostridia and Ruminococcaceae bacteria, both groups known for aiding in plant fiber digestion. But even these bacterial helpers can't completely overhaul the system. They work under time pressure, because a short digestive tract moves food along before microbes can fully break it down. The result is low efficiency. Pandas can absorb some sugars and nutrients from bamboo, but most of what they eat isn't fully digested. You can see the proof in their droppings, large, fibrous, and full of undigested plant material. It's the digestive equivalent of running a factory line too fast. A lot of material goes through, but the yield is relatively low. That inefficiency shapes much of a panda's daily routine. They conserve energy wherever possible. You don't see them sprinting around endlessly or chasing prey. They move slowly, rest often, and keep their body temperature on the lower side compared to other bears, all to balance out the gap between calories in and calories out. Even their famously lazy appearance is really an energy strategy learned over millions of years. Seasonal changes in bamboo growth add another layer to this story. Bamboo isn't the same all year. In spring and early summer, fresh shoots emerge, softer, more succulent and richer in protein than mature culms. Pandas focus heavily on these because they offer the best return for the least chewing effort. Later in the year, when shoots are scarce, they switch to leaves. Leaves have more fiber and less protein, but still enough nutrients to keep them alive. This seasonal diet change isn't just about preference, it's a calculated shift to keep their nutrient intake balanced, despite eating one plant almost exclusively. In some regions, pandas even adjust their elevation throughout the year to track the growth of their favorite bamboo species. Since bamboo shoots emerge earlier in lower altitudes and later higher up, moving between these zones extends the shoot season by weeks, giving pandas more time to eat the high-quality parts of the plant before settling back into leaf mode. This kind of seasonal tracking is a quiet, efficient way to get more out of an otherwise poor food source. The balance between their inefficient digestion and their survival hinges on abundance. In the wild forests of Sichuan, Shanxi, and Gansu, bamboo grows thick, often carpeting the understory of entire valleys. It regenerates quickly after being eaten and spreads aggressively, meaning pandas rarely have to search far for their next meal. Without that abundance, the strategy of eat all day would collapse. In years or regions where bamboo flowers and dies off, a natural cycle that can wipe out large areas of the plant, pandas face real risks. They have to either move to find another bamboo stand or face starvation, because their bodies can't easily switch back to the meat-based diet their ancestors once used. The irony is that their digestive system is stuck halfway between lifestyles. They have the gut of an omnivore predator, but the teeth, jaw, and hand adaptations of a plant specialist. It's evolution in progress, caught in a stable but unusual balance. This compromise means that instead of evolving the stomach of a cow, they evolved the lifestyle of a food processing machine, feeding for up to 14 hours a day, resting between meals, and keeping their movements limited to areas dense with bamboo. In captivity, this reality is even more obvious. Zoos often supply fresh bamboo daily and keep careful track of how much each panda eats to ensure it meets its massive intake needs. They may also supplement with specially formulated biscuits or other foods high in protein to make up for what's missing from bamboo alone. But even then, the panda's instincts hold. They still prefer bamboo as the mainstay of their diet, treating anything else as a side item. Comparing their strategy to other animals drives the point home. Koalas, for example, also eat a notoriously low-quality food, eucalyptus leaves, but they evolved long secums to aid fermentation, and they move even less than pandas. Horses, on the other hand, have a large hindgut fermentation chamber to process grasses. Pandas went a third way. No gut overhaul, just constant intake. It's a rare approach in the mammal world, made possible largely because bamboo forests can support it. The strain of living this way means their reproductive and growth rates are shaped by the same constraints. Cubs develop slowly, mothers invest heavily in care, and even small disruptions in food supply can have outsized impacts. In the wild, a panda's home range is often determined not by the presence of shelter or water, but by the density of bamboo within it. Every decision the animal makes, where to rest, how far to travel, filters through the lens of how much energy it will cost versus how much it can replace by eating. This system works, but only because enough bamboo exists in their range to keep it running. If that balance tips, say from habitat loss, climate changes altering bamboo growth cycles, or mass flowering events, it becomes harder for pandas to survive without human help. That dependence on one food source is a vulnerability baked deep into their biology. So the strange reality is that a panda survives with a gut that's mismatched to its diet, relying on bacterial allies, extreme specialization, and an almost industrial-scale feeding schedule. They don't wrestle bamboo into submission for love of the taste alone. It's because they have no other real choice. Efficiency was traded for reliability a very long time ago, and reversing that trade now would mean undoing millions of years of adaptation. From the outside, watching a panda chew might look lazy or indulgent. In reality, it's a constant calculation. Eat enough today to make it to tomorrow without burning more energy than you can replace. Every bite is part of a bigger pattern, and that pattern underlies everything from their solitary movements to their breeding cycles. And that leads to the next question. You can sustain yourself day to day with this strategy, but how do you bring new life into the world under such tight energy limits? The answer begins with something that seems impossible. For a giant bear, the smallest newborn you've ever seen, a newborn panda is so small you could fit it in the palm of your hand. At just over 3 or 4 ounces, it's closer in size to a stick of butter than anything resembling a bear. The adults they eventually become can weigh as much as 300 pounds, which makes for one of the most dramatic size differences between birth and adulthood in the mammal world. And it's not just their size. At birth, they are almost bare-skinned, just covered with a faint layer of white fuzz that looks more like static cling than fur. Their eyes are sealed shut, their ears folded against their heads, and they have no ability to walk or regulate their own body temperature. If you put one down outside of its mother's fur pocket, it wouldn't last long. Most other bear species give birth to offspring that are small relative to the mother, but pandas take it to an extreme. This is odd when you look at the numbers. A gestation period, anywhere from about 95 to 160 days, is more in line with a cub you could picture scrambling around within weeks. Not a cub that will remain almost motionless for the first month of its life. The panda's cub is among the most underdeveloped newborns of any placental mammal of its size. And that raises an important question. What evolutionary path leads to this kind of outcome? One theory hinges on energy budgets during pregnancy. Remember the diet question. A mother is getting almost all her calories from bamboo, a plant that is low in fat, low in protein, and slow to yield results in digestion. Growing a large, well-developed cub inside her would require a reliable surplus she simply doesn't have. The low caloric return puts a cap on how much energy can go toward fetal growth without threatening the mother's own survival. Producing a much smaller cub means she can devote fewer resources during gestation and save that energy for the months after birth. It's a trade. A panda mother delivers an extremely vulnerable cub, but by keeping it small, she can carry it without draining her already tight reserves. In exchange, she has to commit to one of the longest and most energy-intensive maternal care periods of any bear. It is not a strategy that would work for a species living in fast-changing, unpredictable conditions. But in a relatively stable habitat with year-round bamboo, the math balances out. Observers in the wild and in zoos see the same basic pattern play out. From the moment the cub is born, the mother holds it almost constantly. She uses her front legs to build a cradle, pressing the cub against the thicker fur on her chest, warming it with her own body heat. Because the cub cannot thermoregulate, any extended separation could lead to rapid cooling and death. In the first weeks, she will leave the den only for quick feeding trips, often less than a few minutes. Every movement she makes is careful, rolling the cub gently or shifting it to nurse. In zoos, this routine can be seen in even greater detail thanks to den cameras. Keepers have documented mothers licking their cubs almost continuously in the early hours, both to clean them and to stimulate breathing and digestion. The cub's brush, thin, high, surprisingly loud for its size, provoke instant reaction. The mother will adjust her body, cut the cub closer, and resume grooming. Many of these behaviors are understanding cubs and risks The constraints of this reproductive style mean pandas produce relatively few offspring over their lifetimes compared to other mammals of similar size. Combined with habitat loss, this low reproductive rate is one of the points that has historically pushed them toward endangered status. If a mother loses a cub, it may be years before she reproduces again. And in a landscape with shrinking bamboo forests, each missed chance matters. From a purely biological perspective, their cub strategy is a logical adaptation to their diet. A bamboo-fed bear can't afford the energy strain of building a large, well-developed cub inside its body. It's more efficient, though far riskier, to offload that growth to the outside world, where it can be fueled by milk and guarded constantly. The trade-off is long commitment, high vulnerability, and a narrow window for successful rearing. In captive breeding centers, the tiny size of newborns poses its own challenges. Staff must sometimes step in if a cub struggles to latch, grows too slowly, or if the mother seems inattentive. Weighing them daily is standard, and any drop in mass can trigger intervention. The room they are kept in must be kept warm, as even brief exposure to cooler air can lower a newborn's body temperature below safe limits. These modern interventions mimic, as closely as possible, what the mother would do. Constant warmth, constant feeding, constant contact. And yet, despite the fragility of these first months when it all works, the transformation is remarkable. By the time a cub is 8 months old, it's often climbing, exploring short distances from the den, gnawing bamboo shoots with its developing teeth. The contrast with the helpless, silent bundle from day one, hard to reconcile unless you've watched the whole arc. That leap from mouse size to the miniature bear is powered entirely by mechanical care, and the bear pulls resources from the sparse diet stretched over many weeks. The survival of these tiny arrivals hinges on something pandas have quietly relied on for millions of years: a safe, predictable environment without steady bamboo supplies, few predators, and sheltered den sites. The slow growth strategy collapses. Lose those conditions and no amount of parental instinct can make up the difference. This is why habitat stability and security are as crucial to cub survival as the mother herself. Once the long months of nursing and guarding are behind them, the cubs begin the shift to a more independent life, shadowing the mother until they can feed and fend for themselves. But even with stronger muscles and sharper senses, the forests still hold threats. Which brings up the next problem. Out in the open, how does a panda's appearance keep it from drawing the wrong kind of attention? A panda's coat isn't just some quirky fashion choice from nature. It's a layered strategy shaped over thousands of generations, serving needs that are both practical and social. The sharp black and white pattern isn't there to look cute on a postcard. It's a survival tool. And like most survival tools, its biggest advantage is that it works without anyone thinking about it. To us, that coat is immediately recognizable. Out in the wild, in the right light, it can make them slip from sight. Here's the question scientists have been working on for years. Does all that high contrast fur hide them? Or does it make them stand out even more? On paper, a giant black and white animal seems about as stealthy as a traffic sign. But in their real environment, the situation is different. Their home is a puzzle of vertical bamboo stalks, low shrubs, scattered snow in winter, and deep shadow patches even on sunny days. This creates sharp contrasts in light, not smooth, uniform backgrounds. Against those backdrops, the alternating black and white actually helps break up the panda's shape. It's a version of what's called disruptive coloration, where bold patterns split the outline of the body so your brain has a harder time telling where the animal starts and ends. In snowy months, this works even better. The white fur blends into snowbanks, while the black legs and shoulders fade into the shadowed stems of bamboo or dark soil beneath it. Those broad black areas absorb light, almost turning into voids when viewed from a distance. It's not invisibility. Predators up close would still see them, but in low visibility conditions like winter haze or mist, that coat does a surprisingly good job at blurring the edges. A leopard, their main natural predator in some regions, still has to spot them through a forest riddled with light and dark flashes as winds stir the bamboo. That confusion buys the panda time. Summer's version of the same trick comes with dappled light on the forest floor. Sun filters through the canopy, creating small bright patches and irregular blotches of shade everywhere. Here, the black sections mimic the shadow lines, while the white fur reflects the filtered light beams, making the panda's body melt more into the background than you'd expect. Field photography has shown how well this works. Zoom in, reveal the full outline of the animal, but step back, and the shapes fragment into mismatched patches. From the right angle, the head becomes light between two vertical black stars, and the body is light. Camouflage, however, isn't the only job this pattern does. That bold face, with its inky eye patches and black ears standing out against the white head, pulls waiting panda to panda through the crowd. In species where individuals rarely move outside the windows, quick recognition matters. Those facial markings act like a signature. They can help pandas tell each other apart even in dim conditions from a distance. Distinguishing sex, age, and possibly individual identity could prevent unnecessary fights or wasted energy during the short mating window. You don't want to throw a set of power the eye patches stand out here. They aren't just big circles. They form domes around the eyes, There's also the theory that the coat sends a message to other species, not just their own. The predator deterrence hypothesis suggests that the bold patterns might make the animal look larger or more imposing. Many animals in nature use bright or highly contrasting colors to advertise danger or at least toughness. Think wasps, skunks, or certain snakes. For the panda, the message might be more of a bluff. I see you and I'm not going to run. This aligns with their behavioral style. Pandas don't sprint to escape danger in the way deer or antelope do. They often stand their ground or move off at a steady pace. Whether this is because of energy conservation or confidence in their physical size, the result is the same. They're not behaving like prey. Chaotic, high-contrast markings could reinforce that stance. This isn't purely hypothetical. Some carnivores size up opponents partly by scanning for unusual or bold markings that could indicate a threat. While a panda's diet is almost entirely plant-based, their build is still bear-like. A would-be predator could take one look at those stark markings paired with a 200-pound frame and decide the risk isn't worth it. Even in the predator-prey chess game, not being chosen as the first move can be enough to survive. Thermoregulation might play a small supporting role in the coat's design. In cooler seasons, the black patches on the shoulders and legs could absorb heat more efficiently from the limited sunlight, making it through the canopy. In warmer stretches, the white fur likely reflects more light, avoiding excess heat gain. While this isn't the main purpose of the coloration, the arrangement may offer small temperature-controlled benefits without altering the survival advantages. Part of what makes the panda's coloration so interesting is that it's a compromise. Many animals evolve coats for a single dominant function: hide from predators, advertise to mates, or regulate temperature. The panda's fur seems to serve all three to some extent, without any one of them completely taking over. That balance likely comes from life in a fairly consistent, predictable habitat, but one that still changes visually between the snowy season and the dense green of summer. Having a coat that works in both contexts avoids the need for seasonal color shifts like those used by hares or ermines. It's a rare case where something designed to hide also became a banner in the human mind. We notice pandas because their coat stands out starkly to us in artificial contexts: zoos, photos, logos, yet in the wild it's tuned to a background of snow, shadow, and sunspots. This split in perception may have helped push them into the role we assign them today. To us, their coat is a symbol. To them, it's a set of practical visual tools refined by countless generations of survival. Every color patch on that body has a function: black on the limbs to erase the edges in shade, white on the belly and head to fade into snow or light, black ears and eye patches for communication and recognition. A design, created without a designer, that meets the needs of both solitary lifestyles and the occasional social encounter. It's not just what you see, it's what other pandas see, and what predators are meant to think they see. And that's where the panda's fur starts becoming more than just camouflage. Those same facial patterns and the striking overall look turned into a cultural trait once humans entered the scene. The qualities that make them recognizable to each other became the markers that made them recognizable to us. And once humans find an animal distinct enough to notice, history starts getting involved. In ancient China, the panda could be more than something living quietly in a forest. It could be carried into an imperial court, paraded before an audience of officials, and then sent on to another land as a diplomatic gift. Not just any animal, a rare one, not easy to find, not easy to keep alive, and unlike anything a foreign ruler might have seen before. The idea was simple enough. You don't hand over something ordinary if you want to impress a king or emperor. You give them something that shows your land's wealth, its uniqueness, and the control you have over nature itself. The first references we have to pandas in writing go back to the Han Dynasty, over 2,000 years ago. By that time, their image had already reached beyond just an entry in a natural description. Pandas were mentioned in records alongside other items of value, which suggests they held a place in the cultural imagination. The Han court was a place of carefully calculated presentation. Every gift, every sign was a tool to send a message about power and position. An animal as unusual as the panda fit into that without any trouble. By the Tang Dynasty, the whole concept of gifting pandas had evolved into something more formal. Tang China traded with and received envoys from as far as Central Asia and beyond. When foreign rulers visited or a mission went out, the court could hand over silk, precious works of art, or in rare cases, living animals. A panda arriving in another country wasn't just an exotic pet. It was proof that you'd been given something almost impossible to obtain without China's cooperation. In this system, animals could work as physical tokens of political ties in a way words alone could not. The Tang weren't casual about this. Sending live pandas meant planning transport, feeding and care along routes that could stretch for weeks. For shorter exchanges, or where live transport wasn't possible, pelts could be sent instead. Even a pelt was significant, dark and light fur in perfect contrast, preserved in a way that showed the animal's striking pattern. To the person receiving it, such a gift would stand for a connection to the Chinese court and to the reputation that came with it. Pandas were also shaped in the Chinese imagination by layers of symbolic meaning. By the Song dynasty, records suggest they were seen as able to ward off evil. That belief leaned on their calm, unhurried behavior and the sense of peace their appearance carried. In a world where superstition intertwined with politics, giving a ruler an animal thought to repel bad fortune was a gesture with both practical and spiritual angles. It meant you wished them safety, stability, and harmony, and that you were in a position to send a large, rare animal just for that purpose. This connection between panda symbolism and power was reinforced in the way they appeared in art. Through the centuries, paintings and sculptures occasionally featured pandas, not as overwhelming, dangerous beasts, but as serene figures. Their presence in art mirrored their role in politics, quiet, distinctive, but carrying unspoken weight. And unlike depictions of tigers or leopards, which could suggest ferocity and dominance, a panda symbolized something less aggressive but still commanding respect. Peace without weakness. Moving forward to the Ming dynasty, the tradition of using pandas in diplomacy kept a foothold. By this point, maritime expeditions were expanding China's contact with other nations. Gifts from these voyages were chosen not just for value but for their ability to impress. Sending a panda, either living or as a pelt, still played on that same formula: rarity, national pride, and the assertion that China controlled resources no one else could produce. In both overland and seaborne missions, the panda stood as a kind of envoy that didn't speak but carried a clear political language. One reason this gift worked so well was the animal's rarity. Pandas have never lived across wide areas the way deer or wild cattle have. Even inside China, their range was limited. Add the fact that they didn't breed in large numbers and were not easy to keep alive in captivity, and you had an animal that couldn't be replicated easily elsewhere. You couldn't just go and find another one in your own forests. If you had a panda, it meant you'd been given it by someone with access, which in ancient and medieval Asia almost always meant China. Imperial records hold examples that make this link between rarity and power clear. When a ruler in another region received a panda, it went into their own records as something worth noting for history. Often these creatures were shown to high-ranking guests, treated alongside precious objects, or housed in enclosures meant for the most prized animals. In some cases, foreign courts took special care to keep pelts in good condition, bringing them out as part of ceremonial displays for years after they arrived. The original moment of gifting lasted far longer as a status symbol. That aura of mystique didn't vanish with the dynasties that gave out the pandas. The whole idea, using the animal's unique appearance and scarcity as political currency, left a blueprint that carried through the centuries. What's now called panda diplomacy in the modern era follows the same basic model, even if the context is different. Loaning pandas to a zoo in another country comes with conditions, cooperation agreements, and the unspoken reminder that China is the source. The animal, still rare and instantly recognizable, continues to stand for goodwill backed by exclusivity. You might think the gentle image of a panda would make it an odd fit for a world of politics, but that's what made it so useful. Unlike fierce animals that might symbolize military strength, the panda's association with peace fits certain diplomatic situations better. In the ancient context, sending a tiger could risk suggesting intimidation. Sending a panda suggested a desire for mutual respect and stable relations. It was the same message wrapped in fur instead of armor. The symbolic meanings also tied into deeper philosophical threads in Chinese culture. Harmony with nature, the value of balance, and the virtue of peace all found easy representation in the panda. Giving such an animal wasn't just handing over a creature. It was offering an embodiment of ideals. For a culture where symbolism could shape the tone of a relationship, that mattered. The link between the panda and a harmonious order wasn't accidental. It was cultivated through stories, beliefs, and the careful placement of the animal in art and ceremony. Some historical accounts mention pandas shown in reception halls or gardens when foreign envoys arrived, just as a way to let visitors see them without even making a gift. The effect would be similar to walking someone past an ornate treasure they couldn't buy, a reminder of both the host's wealth and their ability to protect it. Making the panda occasional but visible kept its image strong without letting it become ordinary. You can imagine the journey these pandas took, from mountain forests into controlled enclosures, then onto the capital, where they became part of a carefully managed presentation. If they traveled abroad, they went with handlers, supplies, and instructions. Even if the animal didn't survive long in foreign hands, the purpose was already served. The gift had been given, the message received, and the political link reinforced. That history left the panda with two converging identities. One as a quiet, bamboo-eating bear living in limited mountain ranges, and another as a cultural messenger crossing borders at the highest levels of state. Its peaceful habits made it an easy symbol for harmony, yet its scarcity made it a sign of privilege. Both qualities worked together to keep it in the toolkit of Chinese diplomacy for well over 1,000 years. So when you see a panda in another country's zoo today, with an agreement signed between governments to house it, you're looking at something with deep roots. The same logic applied when an emperor's delegation led a panda into a foreign court centuries ago. It's not just an animal, it's a living emblem that carries weight far beyond its size or diet. Its political life began a long time before modern conservation efforts and public fascination. From the Han scribes recording its existence through Tang and Ming rulers sending it as a living gift, the panda became a steady piece of China's diplomatic language. It stood for goodwill, peace, and a quiet kind of prestige that didn't need swords to back it up. And those associations didn't die out, they scaled up. Because in the centuries ahead, that black and white figure would shift from an imperial curiosity into something much larger, a face recognized and claimed by the world. Pandas have survived ice ages and warm interglacial periods while barely leaving their home range. While other large mammals roamed continents in search of food and better climates, pandas stayed tied to roughly the same part of the world, mainly in what's now China. Their fossil record shows only small shifts in territory over millions of years, following bamboo rather than migrating great distances. This stability comes from a single factor: bamboo's resilience. It grows in cold, survives snow, and regrows quickly after being eaten. Because bamboo thrives in a variety of conditions, pandas could survive climate swings by moving up or down slopes to follow fresh shoots rather than traveling hundreds of miles. This vertical migration is still part of their seasonal behavior today. Over thousands of generations, pandas evolved for endurance rather than expansion. Slow reproduction, low energy lifestyles, and strong specialization. While this made them vulnerable to habitat loss, it worked as long as bamboo remained in their valleys and mountains. Fossils show their range shrinking and stretching with climate changes, but never leaping to new continents or biomes. It's a quiet survival story compared to roaming herds or predators chasing prey, but it's remarkably effective. Their patience and specialization carried them through natural climate shifts for millions of years. Now, however, human development fragments the same slopes and valleys that once sheltered them. What worked in the past may not be enough to face the unpredictable changes of the modern world. Today's pandas live in the misty mountains of Sichuan, Gansu, and Shanxi, surrounded by dense bamboo forests. But for most of their history, they roamed lowland valleys and foothills, rich in mixed forests and broad bamboo stands. Over centuries, expanding farmland, logging, and human settlements steadily erased these lowland habitats. Forest loss broke up bamboo stands, forcing pandas into higher, less disturbed slopes where bamboo still grew in continuous bands. The move to the mountains brought new challenges: cooler climates, steeper terrain, and more seasonal bamboo growth, but also fewer people and safer feeding areas. Over generations, lowland populations vanished, leaving only small, isolated groups in separate mountain ranges. This fragmentation reduced genetic diversity and limited movement between populations. Modern conservation now focuses on protecting these mountain habitats and creating corridors to reconnect them. While the mountains have kept pandas alive, they also confine them to smaller, fragile ranges. The image of the mountain panda is iconic today, but it's the result of centuries of human-driven displacement rather than natural choice. In less than a century, the giant panda went from a bear most people had never seen in person and barely knew existed to one of the most instantly recognized animals on the planet. If you were alive 100 years ago outside of China, the chances you'd even heard of them were slim. You might have seen their name mentioned in a book about distant wildlife, but there'd be no clear image that came to mind. Soon enough, though, this reclusive mountain specialist in central China would become the animal people identified more than almost any other when asked about endangered species. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened because governments, conservation groups, and media decided to push the panda forward as the ambassador for protecting nature. The change really took hold in the mid-20th century. By that stage, scientists were starting to realize how few of these animals remained. Most of the world's population was concentrated into small, isolated mountain forests, cut off from one another by farmland and development. The threat wasn't hypothetical. It was right there in the shrinking range maps, but convincing the wider public to care about a quiet, bamboo-eating bear that most would never see was a challenge. Conservationists quickly learned that the panda's face was a rare advantage. Its high-contrast markings stood out even in black and white photographs, a benefit in an era when not all media was in color. Its large, dark eyes and round features didn't make it look threatening to a general audience, even people who didn't think of bears kindly. By the 1960s, one decision cemented the transition from rare Chinese mammal to global emblem. The newly formed World Wildlife Fund needed a logo, something simple enough to reproduce across dozens of countries, and something that symbolized the fragility of endangered species without being tied to only one part of the world. They chose the panda. The fact that it was already scarce in the wild played into the story they wanted to tell. The fact that it looked distinctive from any other bear helped it stick in memory. From then on, every brochure, fundraising letter, and awareness ad the organization released was stamped with that black and white outline. The effect was immediate in conservation marketing terms. People didn't have to remember complicated species names or follow detailed descriptions of where the animal lived. They could look at the panda symbol and connect it to the general idea: save the animals, protect the environment. That association worked even for people who would never see one in person or visit its habitat. The panda became a stand-in for all endangered wildlife. Once the image began circling the globe in print and on television, the panda's public identity started shifting. For centuries, it had been a Chinese symbol tied to the country's own cultural and political history. Now it was being claimed as a universal icon, an animal that didn't just belong to one nation but represented global responsibility. Campaigns talking about deforestation, extinction, and climate impacts could use it just as effectively in North America or Europe as in Beijing or Chengdu. Its origin story stayed the same, but its meaning expanded. In that sense, the panda was a perfect messenger for the conservation movement of the late 20th century. It didn't carry the baggage some other species did. It wasn't considered dangerous to humans, so there was no fear factor to overcome. It wasn't closely tied to controversial hunting debates the way whales or certain predators were. And its story was straightforward. An animal losing its habitat, a shrinking population, and a chance to reverse the decline if people acted in time. Documentaries and news features started building on that message. Footage of pandas in reserves or zoos was easy to make appealing. Close-up shots of them chewing bamboo, rolling in snow, or napping leaned into an image audiences responded to. But intertwined with the lighter images were the facts about how fragile their survival was. The contrast made the point. This wasn't just a cute animal, it was a species hanging on by limited habitat and slow reproduction, and without direct changes in how land was managed, it could disappear. International media coverage reinforced the shift from local rarity to global concern. When Chinese panda loans to foreign zoos were part of diplomatic agreements, the arrival of the animal drew reporters and crowds. Articles and TV spots reached audiences who had never heard about panda numbers dwindling. Seeing the animal in their own country gave people the feeling of connection, and seeing that it wasn't just given but loaned reinforced that its protection was a matter of diplomatic pride. Public opinion moved fast once the panda's image was everywhere. It was easier to fundraise when there was a face attached to the cause. The animal's appeal brought in donations to conservation programs not only within China but to organizations working on global biodiversity. The logic was simple. If people cared about pandas, groups could link that concern to larger environmental issues, pulling attention toward the forests they shared with other species and toward broader climate threats. The panda's appearance on posters, merchandise, and educational materials made it a conservation brand before that term was common. Schools used it in lessons about endangered species. NGOs used it on banners during campaigns to protect habitats thousands of miles from bamboo forests. This cross-application worked because the symbolism had moved beyond simple geography. A child in London or Nairobi could see the panda sign and know it meant save wildlife, no matter what kind. That kind of branding can feel calculated, but it's also what gave pandas a better shot at survival. The attention they received led to more resources directed to mapping their range, finding ways to connect isolated populations, and enforcing logging bans in key forest areas. Captive breeding programs gained funding that might not have been there if the species had stayed a local concern. The panda's new identity as an international emblem turned an obscure conservation challenge into something millions of people felt they had a stake in. This amplification also came with a narrative, adaptation and resilience in an animal that didn't roar its way through history, but instead survived through steady, quiet changes. That narrative appealed to people in a way the stories of more aggressive species sometimes didn't. It suggested the possibility of nonviolent endurance even in a tough world, which mirrored certain cultural ideals in conservation circles. By the late 20th century, the panda wasn't just a species under protection. Its story was used as an example in policy discussions, wildlife documentaries, and public talks about what could be achieved if enough money, science, and political will were brought together. That visibility had its own momentum. Funding led to habitat protection and research, which led to population gains in certain regions, which then became proof to the public that conservation worked, which justified more funding. Of course, the global promotion of the panda meant that some other, less striking endangered species were left with less attention. Conservationists have debated whether focusing effort on so-called charismatic megafauna takes resources away from less famous but equally threatened animals. But the counter-argument has been that the panda's pulling power creates a net gain for many species, when large habitat protection measures are implemented. Protect the panda forests, and you protect countless other plants and animals that share the same ecosystem. The panda's path from local legend to global icon is also a reminder of how much human perception shapes an animal's fate. Without the luck of having the right face for a logo, it's unlikely the panda would have become the face of international conservation so quickly. Without television's rise at the right moment, its behaviors wouldn't have been broadcast into living rooms with the same reach. And without a coordinated effort from conservation groups to keep it at the forefront, its story might have faded under the weight of other environmental crises. Yet here it is, still in the mountains, still eating bamboo, still surrounded by the same quiet that defined its history. The difference is that now its image is on posters, websites, stamps, toys, and public campaigns in almost every country. People who've never set foot in a Chinese bamboo forest still feel they know it. That recognition has been turned into political currency, fundraising leverage, and educational shorthand. The global cause built around pandas didn't erase the fact that their survival depends on the specific details of their natural history. The same slow reproduction, specialized diet, and narrow range that carried them through ancient climate swings. But weaving those details into an internationally shared symbol made it harder to ignore their situation. It gave their endurance story an audience far bigger than the mountain valleys where it's actually lived out. From a bear most couldn't name to the global face of wildlife protection in under a century, that arc has as much to do with strategy and timing as it does with the panda itself. Which leaves one last thing to consider. An animal this patient and specialized, that's crossed from legend to global emblem, might have more to teach about persistence than most of us thought. And that's where we turn next. The panda's story shows that survival doesn't have to be explosive or fast. It can be built on tiny, almost invisible changes that add up over millions of years. No sudden leaps, no dramatic reinventions, just steady adjustment until the animal fits its world perfectly. In a time where speed is the benchmark for success, that's worth noticing. Persistence, even at its slowest, can outlast chaos. Maybe it's a reminder that not every race is decided by who moves first. So take a moment, slow down. Let something in your own life grow at its own pace and see where it leads.